The rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming a chaotic rhythm against the cracked asphalt of the deserted New York alleyway. Each droplet was like a cold hand pressing against the life he thought he'd already lost. Blood mingled with the rainwater, streaking across his face, his body trembling from the shock of betrayal and the chill that sank deep into his bones. He didn't know how long he had been lying there, half-conscious, staring at the gray, oppressive sky that seemed to mock him with its silence. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, its sound distorted by the pounding rain, fading in and out like a cruel heartbeat. He tried to lift his head, tried to convince himself that someone would come, that someone might save him from this dark, endless night, but the city had always been cruel, and tonight it felt merciless. The alley smelled of wet concrete, gasoline, and the metallic tang of blood. His mind flickered through fragments of memories: betrayal, a sudden ambush, a friend's hand that had not reached out when it should have. He realized, with bitter clarity, that he had been left for dead. Alone, abandoned, in the city that never paused, never forgave. Then, through the blur of rain and darkness, he saw the faint gleam of headlights cutting through the night. At first, he thought it was a hallucination, a cruel trick his mind was playing to lure him into hope. The car slowed, engine humming low, the rain bouncing off the polished hood. And then he saw him, the Italian Mafia boss. The name alone carried weight, whispered in every dark corner of the city, in Mafia clubs, in hushed conversations where power and fear intertwined. He had heard stories of him, ruthless, precise, untouchable, a man whose wealth and connections stretched into the very veins of New York City power and control. Yet here he was, stepping out of a sleek black car, the rain streaming off his tailored coat, his presence filling the alley with an aura of authority and danger. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the rain fading into a background hum. The man crouched beside him, assessing him with sharp, calculating eyes that seemed to pierce through the layers of pain, grime, and despair. "You're alive," he said simply, voice low, carrying the resonance of command that could silence an entire room without a word. "And that's unusual. Most don't make it this far." There was no immediate kindness, no false sympathy. Just observation. Judgment. And something else, something unexpected that prickled against the numbness in his veins, a spark of hope he hadn't felt in hours. The Mafia boss's hand reached down, gripping his arm firmly, lifting him with a strength that was almost inhuman. Each movement was precise, deliberate, a display of power that seemed to radiate in the rain-slicked alley. As he dragged him toward the car, his eyes scanned the shadows with an intensity that spoke of experience, of lives lived in control, of enemies made and eliminated in silence. He opened the car door and ushered him inside, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the chill outside, the scent of expensive leather mingling with the faint, intoxicating aroma of expensive cologne. "You should have died tonight," the boss said, seating him carefully. "But something tells me you're meant for more." His gaze lingered, weighing him, reading him like an open ledger. There was danger in those eyes, and yet against every instinct that screamed to resist he felt an undeniable pull toward them, a curiosity that outweighed fear. He wanted to know why this man had stopped. Why the Mafia hood, the power, the respect, the connections to every corner of the city, had chosen him. And he wanted, irrationally, to survive. The car moved, cutting through the rain-soaked streets of New York, the city alive with distant lights, muffled sounds, the chaos of life continuing obliviously around them. Inside, silence hung, tense and charged, broken only by the rhythm of the windshield wipers. The Mafia boss finally spoke again. "You're lucky," he said. "Lucky doesn't often survive the mistakes that brought you here. But tonight, luck has a price, and it seems, you owe me." Confusion, fear, and a flicker of excitement coursed through him. Owed him? He didn't even know this man. He didn't understand why he was alive, why this dark figure had stopped, or what his motives were. Yet, as he glanced at the Mafia boss, seated across from him, every bit the embodiment of power, respect, and a life lived dangerously. He felt the first stirrings of an unexpected love, or at least, an inexplicable pull that defied reason. As the car glided through the empty avenues, memories of betrayal and loss returned, sharper now, mingling with the warmth and threat emanating from the man beside him. The city outside was indifferent, but inside this car, a new story was beginning, one of humanity, dark love, and choices that would test the limits of morality, loyalty, and desire. Every turn of the wheel seemed to lead him further from death and closer to a world he had never imagined, a world ruled by power, wealth, and an enigmatic Italian mafia boss who had decided, for reasons unknown, that he would not die tonight. By the time the car stopped in a secluded garage, the storm had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the city washed in a gray, reflective sheen. The mafia boss turned to him, a smirk playing on his lips, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to your new life," he said, stepping out, leaving the car door open. "It's not safe, it's not easy, and it's not what you expect. But it's yours, if you want it." And in that moment, soaked, shivering, and uncertain, he realized that nothing in his life would ever be the same. Left for dead in the rain, he had survived. And now, in the hands of power, wealth, darkness, and unexpected love, he was about to learn just how far loyalty and danger could reach. The garage smelled of oil, leather, and damp concrete, a stark contrast to the relentless storm outside. The man shivered, wrapping his arms around himself as he watched the Italian mafia boss move with an effortless grace, each step deliberate, every motion radiating authority and danger. The soft click of polished shoes against the floor echoed, a metronome marking the rhythm of a life lived on the edge of law and chaos. He realized that he had been thrust into a world he didn't understand, a world where respect was earned not through words but through fear, loyalty, and cunning. The mafia boss stopped beside a sleek black motorcycle parked in the corner, resting a hand on its seat. "You'll need to learn fast," he said, eyes glinting with something unspoken, a mixture of challenge and curiosity. "In my world, hesitation gets you killed. Indecision, worse." The protagonist swallowed hard, attempting to summon courage he didn't feel. I don't understand," he stammered. "Why me? Why now?" The boss tilted his head, regarding him as one would a puzzle piece, calculating whether it fit the larger design of a complex plan. "Why you?" he repeated slowly, voice low, resonant. "Because you survived. Because you caught my attention when most would have crumbled. And because, whether you know it or not, your life, your choices could serve a purpose far greater than you imagine." There was a weight in those words, a promise of danger and opportunity intertwined. And beneath it, a subtle undercurrent, a sense of curiosity that was almost personal. He watched the boss move toward a table stacked with meticulously organized folders, photographs, and ledgers that seemed to chart the underbelly of New York City mafia clubs, political connections, illicit trades, and unspoken alliances. The room seemed like a command center, a nerve center of influence, where every decision rippled outward, touching lives in ways both visible and hidden. The protagonist's chest tightened. He was an outsider here, yet somehow, by the cruel twist of fate, he had been drawn into the very heart of darkness. "You'll need to understand the rules," the mafia boss continued, tapping a finger on a ledger filled with names, dates, and accounts. "Not all enemies are obvious. Some wear suits and shake hands in daylight. Others hide in shadows. And most of the time, the lines between friend and foe are blurred." His gaze lingered, sharp and piercing. "You will learn to survive. Or you will die." There was a pause, a quiet moment punctuated only by the hum of the garage lights. The protagonist felt the weight of the statement, the gravity of the unspoken threat. But beneath it, something unexpected stirred, a flicker of trust, fragile and untested, but undeniable. He sensed that the man before him, this embodiment of power, control, and respect, had chosen him for reasons beyond immediate comprehension. There was danger in that choice, but also opportunity. The boss walked toward him, hand outstretched. "Stand," he said simply. "You'll need to be ready. Always ready. New York City doesn't forgive weakness." The protagonist struggled to his feet, muscles stiff, body trembling from the adrenaline that still coursed through his veins. The boss's eyes met his, and for a brief instant, the rain-soaked vulnerability of earlier seemed to dissolve, replaced by a commanding presence that demanded attention, obedience, and perhaps something more, an unspoken connection that neither fully understood yet. Hours passed in a strange blur. The boss explained the structure of his operations, the way Mafia clubs operated as hubs of influence, the subtle power plays that dictated alliances, and the delicate balance of respect and fear that maintained control over vast territories. The protagonist listened, absorbing fragments of information that would have seemed incomprehensible only hours earlier. Every word carried weight, every pause suggested hidden meaning. And through it all, he felt himself drawn deeper into a web of intrigue, danger, and a dark love he hadn't anticipated. When the rain finally eased outside, leaving the city streets glistening and reflective under the streetlights, the boss led him to the car again. "Tonight, you'll see what loyalty looks like," he said. "You'll see the city from my perspective. And you'll learn that power isn't taken, it's commanded, maintained, respected." The car moved through the empty avenues, each turn revealing a different layer of the city: the crowded clubs where whispered deals were made, the back streets where shadows held secrets, the opulent residences of those who believed themselves untouchable. And all the while, the Mafia boss drove, calm, composed, exuding a presence that seemed to bend the city around him. As they navigated through the maze of New York's underworld, the protagonist began to understand the intricacies of the world he had stumbled into. Every glance, every interaction, every subtle signal carried meaning. And amid the chaos and danger, he noticed something he hadn't expected: glimpses of humanity in the Mafia boss. In fleeting gestures, in moments of quiet observation, there was an awareness of right and wrong, of loyalty and betrayal, of unexpected love that threatened to complicate the rigid structure of his existence. By the time the car returned to the garage hours later, the protagonist was exhausted, overwhelmed, and yet, alive in a way he hadn't felt before. He realized that he was no longer simply a survivor. He was a participant in a game that demanded intelligence, courage, and adaptability. And as he looked at the man before him, seated in the dim light, a storm of conflicting emotions stirred within: fear, respect, curiosity, and the faintest trace of attraction, dangerous and impossible to ignore. "Tomorrow, we begin in earnest," the Mafia boss said, standing, his shadow stretching across the floor like a promise or a threat. "You'll learn, you'll adapt, or you will fail. And if you survive, perhaps you'll understand why I stopped that car for you, in the rain, when death was waiting." The protagonist nodded, though the words didn't capture the turmoil within. He had survived betrayal, he had survived the rain, and now he stood on the precipice of a new existence: a world of power, wealth, moral choices, danger, and an unexpected, dark love that refused to be ignored. The city beyond the garage was alive, indifferent, and unyielding. But within these walls, he had glimpsed something more: an opportunity, a challenge, a connection that would change him forever. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. The storm had passed, but the darkness and the intrigue, the suspense, and the dangerous allure of the Mafia boss had only just begun. The morning light filtered weakly through the garage windows, casting elongated shadows across the concrete floor. The city outside buzzed with its usual chaos: honking cars, hurried footsteps, the distant hum of sirens. But within these walls, a different rhythm prevailed. The Italian Mafia boss moved with precision, each action deliberate, a symphony of control and authority. The protagonist watched him, noting the subtle gestures, the way he handled information, the aura of respect that seemed to bend reality itself. He realized that surviving until now had been mere luck, thriving here would require learning to anticipate, to read not only people but power itself. Today, you'll witness the nature of influence, the boss said, voice calm yet commanding, resonating with a power that made the air itself seem heavier. Control isn't taken with guns alone. It's claimed with strategy, presence, and respect. In New York, the streets are unforgiving. Alliances shift like shadows. And weakness is exploited without mercy. He gestured toward the blackboard mounted on the wall, scrawled with names, territories, and coded symbols representing rival mafia factions, political connections, and the veins of control that extended deep into the city's core. The protagonist followed along, attempting to absorb every detail, every implication, every subtle message hidden in the lines and symbols. He realized that this was more than a world of crime, it was a chessboard of human nature, morality, power, and ambition. And at the center of it all stood the Mafia boss, a man whose presence alone demanded attention, loyalty, and, for reasons the protagonist could not yet define, fascination. Hours passed as they reviewed operations, analyzed potential threats, and discussed strategies. Then the boss's gaze hardened, a sharp edge cutting through the conveneer. "A rival has made a move," he said, voice low, deliberate. "One of our territories was challenged last night. A club we hold, a place of influence and respect, was attacked. Not physically, not yet. But messages were sent, alliances tested. This is a test, and every test has consequences." He turned, eyes locking onto the protagonist. "And you'll witness how power is defended, how decisions are made, and how loyalty is measured under pressure." The words sent a chill through him, mingling fear with an unbidden sense of excitement. He realized that this world, dangerous and unpredictable, demanded a new self, someone who could survive, adapt, and perhaps even thrive amid darkness and intrigue. And he understood, deep within, that the Mafia boss had chosen him not only for survival but for potential to learn, to endure, and to matter in a world that demanded nothing less than excellence. By mid-afternoon, they arrived at one of the Mafia clubs, a place where shadows mingled with soft, ambient lighting, where whispers carried more weight than shouts, and where the balance of power could shift with a glance. The protagonist noted the subtle gestures of those inside, the respectful nods, the lowered eyes, the careful avoidance of direct confrontation. Every movement was a calculation, every interaction a test of allegiance. And at the center of it all, the Mafia boss walked with an unspoken command, his aura radiating control, wealth, and the quiet threat of consequences. A tense encounter unfolded with one of the rival factions, men whose intentions were veiled in politeness but sharpened with hidden menace. The boss's words were few, precise, each syllable measured to convey authority without overt aggression. Yet the underlying threat was unmistakable. Respect, obedience, and recognition of power were not optional, they were demanded. The protagonist watched, fascinated and fearful, as the delicate balance shifted subtly in favor of the boss, demonstrating the influence of presence, reputation, and strategy over brute force alone. As night fell, the city transformed, neon lights reflecting off wet streets, the air heavy with rain-soaked tension. Back in the car, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. The protagonist, overwhelmed yet exhilarated, struggled to articulate the storm of thoughts within. How do you know what to do?" he finally asked, voice hesitant. The boss glanced at him, a shadow of a smile crossing his features. "You learn by observing, by understanding the people, the streets, the ambitions that drive them. Power is not inherited, it's recognized. And those who underestimate it, rarely survive." His eyes softened for a fleeting moment, a glimpse of humanity in a man who wielded fear and respect like a finely tuned instrument. And in that fleeting glimpse, the protagonist felt an unexplainable pull, a dangerous, intoxicating fascination that challenged every instinct, every caution he had clung to since being left in the rain. Hours turned into early morning, and the city outside seemed oblivious to the battles waged in shadows. The protagonist, exhausted, realized he was changing, his fear tempered by curiosity, his desperation replaced by a tentative courage. He understood that loyalty here was currency, that respect was survival, and that the Mafia boss represented both danger and possibility, darkness and unexpected connection. Back in the garage, the boss prepared for the next phase of the night, making calls, issuing orders, and reviewing intelligence with meticulous attention. The protagonist watched, learning, absorbing, and understanding that in this world, morality was nuanced, choices were perilous, and power was both shield and weapon. Before he left, the boss turned, eyes intense. "Remember this," he said. "Trust is earned in action, not words. Loyalty is proven in fire, and love is the most unpredictable weapon of all. Do not underestimate it." The protagonist nodded, understanding the weight of the words, their implications lingering like the smell of rain on concrete. As he left the garage, the city sprawled before him, chaotic, dangerous, indifferent, and yet, somewhere deep inside, he felt a strange sense of purpose, an unexpected thrill that defied reason. He had survived death, discovered a world of power and influence, and glimpsed the shadowed edges of a dark love that would shape every choice to come. And somewhere, in the quiet of the early morning, he realized that his life, once abandoned and broken, had been irrevocably changed. Left for dead in the rain, he had found survival, guidance, and a dangerous connection with the Italian Mafia boss, a bond that promised peril, power, and a love he was only beginning to understand. The city's early morning haze hung over the skyline, softening the jagged edges of steel and glass, but the streets below told a different story. Inside the dimly lit garage, the Italian Mafia boss moved with his usual precision, his aura of control filling every corner of the space. The protagonist stood nearby, still trying to shake the lingering unease from the night's encounters, yet drawn inexplicably to the enigmatic figure who had saved him from death itself. He realized, in a chilling moment of clarity, that survival here demanded more than courage. It demanded adaptability, insight, and a willingness to confront moral boundaries he had never imagined crossing. "You've seen the surface," the boss began, voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Now, you'll see what lies beneath. Not all lessons are taught with words. Some are learned in action, in choice, in consequence. And tonight, you will learn to decide where you stand." He gestured toward the sleek black car parked under the overhead lights, its polished surface reflecting the dim glow of the garage. The protagonist felt a pang of apprehension mixed with a strange anticipation. Whatever awaited him tonight would test the limits of his courage, morality, and loyalty. They drove through the city streets, moving with quiet efficiency, weaving through alleys and side roads that seemed invisible to the average citizen. The rain from the previous night had left puddles that shimmered like fractured mirrors, reflecting the neon glow of distant signs. The boss's hands gripped the steering wheel with an effortless confidence, and the protagonist, sitting beside him, felt an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability mingled with fascination. He could sense the power radiating from the man, a presence that commanded attention, respect, and fear simultaneously. "You'll witness something few outsiders ever do," the boss said, voice low, resonating with authority. "A test of loyalty and judgment. Power is meaningless without understanding the human element, the morality, the fear, the desires that drive people to act against their own survival. Observe closely." They arrived at a quiet, seemingly abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, its brick walls slick with rain residue. Inside, dim lights illuminated figures seated in a tense semicircle, eyes wary, hands poised near concealed weapons. The protagonist recognized the rival faction from the previous night, now gathered not in conflict, but in negotiation, a high-stakes game of respect, threat, and subtle manipulation. The air was thick with tension, every silence weighted with possibility, every glance calculated to measure strength or vulnerability. The Mafia boss stepped forward, exuding calm authority, his presence shifting the atmosphere immediately. "Gentlemen," he began, voice measured, "we're here to resolve a matter without unnecessary bloodshed. You tested our patience, but respect is earned, not demanded by fear alone." His eyes scanned the group, calculating, evaluating reactions, gauging intentions with precision. The protagonist watched in awe, noting the subtle ways the boss commanded attention, balanced threat with diplomacy, and navigated the perilous edge between violence and order. A tense exchange followed, words sharp yet veiled, promises mingling with implicit threats. The rival faction tested boundaries, probing for weaknesses, but each attempt was met with strategic deflection, patience, and a display of the boss's unshakable authority. The protagonist felt his pulse quicken, the thrill of danger and strategy intertwining, a dark fascination growing with each subtle move. He realized that this world perilous, morally gray, intoxicating was teaching him lessons he never knew he needed. At one point, the boss turned to him, eyes sharp. "Observe and learn. When the moment comes, you may be required to act. Your choice will define you. Not everyone survives their first test. Not everyone earns the right to stand here." The words carried weight, pressing against the protagonist's chest like a tangible force. He understood that the lesson was not about physical survival alone, but about understanding human nature, power dynamics, and the moral calculus required in a world where decisions carried irreversible consequences. Hours passed in tense negotiation, subtle threats, and strategic maneuvering. The rival faction gradually acknowledged the boss's dominance, retreating with a mixture of caution and begrudging respect. And through it all, the protagonist absorbed every gesture, every measured word, every calculated pause. He felt himself transforming, shedding the uncertainty and fear that had plagued him since the alley, embracing a nascent understanding of power, loyalty, and the dangerous allure of the Mafia world. When the meeting concluded, the boss led him back to the car, the night air cool and damp against their skin. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. The protagonist struggled to articulate the storm of thoughts and emotions within. I think I understand," he finally said, voice trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. "But it's overwhelming. How do you keep it all in control?" The boss glanced at him, a fleeting softness in his gaze. "Control is an illusion," he said quietly. "What matters is adaptation, perception, and the ability to wield influence without losing yourself. And perhaps, the ability to recognize unexpected connections that make the darkness bearable." There was a pause, a subtle intensity in the words that lingered longer than the statement itself. The protagonist sensed an unspoken meaning, a dark and dangerous hint of affection entwined with power, respect, and a hint of something he could not yet name, something he might not be able to resist. Back in the garage, as dawn approached, the city stretching awake beyond the concrete walls, the protagonist realized he had changed. He had witnessed loyalty tested, morality challenged, and power asserted with finesse and ruthlessness. He had seen the human element behind the menace, glimpsed the subtle codes of respect and fear, and felt the pull of an unexpected, dangerous connection with the Mafia boss who had saved him, guided him, and now shaped his destiny. And as he finally allowed himself to rest, the weight of the night pressing upon him, he understood that this was only the beginning. Every choice from here on would carry consequence, every loyalty would be tested, and every heartbeat might draw him closer to a dark love he could neither predict nor resist. Left for dead in the rain, he had survived. Now, immersed in power, morality, and the magnetic presence of the Italian Mafia boss, he was on the precipice of a life that promised danger, wealth, influence, and a love as unexpected as it was inevitable. The days that followed were a whirlwind of shadowed corridors, whispered deals, and the constant hum of danger. The protagonist had begun to understand the rhythm of the Mafia world, but understanding did not erase fear. Each step he took, each glance he cast, carried consequences he could not always anticipate. And the Italian Mafia boss remained a constant presence, calm, commanding, and unknowably magnetic. Every word from him felt loaded with meaning, every gesture deliberate, every look a mixture of authority, curiosity, and the faintest trace of something personal. One evening, the boss summoned him to a private room in one of the Mafia clubs, a space dimly lit, smoke curling from an ashtray, and the faint scent of expensive leather and cologne hanging in the air. "Tonight, you will face a personal test," he said, voice low, deliberate, carrying that same aura of controlled danger that seemed to bend the room around him. "Your loyalty will be challenged, and the choices you make will define your place in this world. And, perhaps, your connection to me." Before the protagonist could respond, a subtle disturbance in the shadows drew his attention. A rival operative, someone who had been watching, waiting, testing boundaries, stepped forward. The tension was immediate, electric, the air thick with unspoken threats. The boss did not flinch, did not raise his voice, yet every subtle movement of his body radiated controlled power. "You've made a mistake," he said to the newcomer, his words calm but sharp as a blade. "And mistakes are corrected." The rival froze, realizing the magnitude of the situation, the weight of authority pressing down. The protagonist watched, a mixture of fear and fascination coursing through him. The Mafia boss dealt with the threat with surgical precision, not with unnecessary violence, but with a display of power and control so absolute that the room seemed to shift in his favor. Loyalty, respect, fear, each weapon wielded with finesse, each reaction calculated to maintain dominance without losing the human touch that made him terrifying and magnetic at once. When the danger passed, the boss turned to him, eyes intense. "Do you understand what just happened?" he asked. The protagonist nodded, breath shallow, heart pounding. "Yes. I think I do. You command respect. You make them fear consequences without losing control." The boss allowed a brief smile, one that did not quite reach the cold precision in his eyes. "Good. But now, your lesson begins. Someone you trusted may not be what they seem. Trust in this world is a currency, and betrayal is a debt most cannot survive. You must be vigilant. You must choose carefully." That night, as they drove through the rain-soaked streets once more, the city reflected in puddles like fractured mirrors, the protagonist felt the weight of the Mafia world pressing against him. He realized that danger was not only external, it lurked in the shadows of the people he interacted with, the very allies he believed he could trust. And he understood, with chilling clarity, that survival required more than courage. It demanded intuition, perception, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Later, alone with the boss in the private office of the club, the atmosphere shifted. The dim light, the faint hum of the city outside, and the proximity of the Mafia boss created a tension that was almost unbearable. Every movement, every glance, carried significance. The protagonist felt drawn into the intensity of his presence, a magnetic force that mingled fear, fascination, and a burgeoning dark love that he could neither resist nor fully understand. "You survived because you adapted," the boss said, voice low, resonant, carrying the weight of command and something deeper, something personal. "But surviving is not enough. You must prove yourself. Loyalty is demonstrated in action, not words. And sometimes, in the choices you make when no one is watching." The words lingered, echoing in the protagonist's mind, intertwining with the dangerous allure of the man before him. He realized that this world full of power, betrayal, and moral ambiguity was also a world where unexpected love could flourish, hidden beneath layers of danger, dominance, and respect. And as the boss stepped closer, their proximity charged with unspoken energy, the protagonist felt a thrill unlike any before, fear mixed with desire, caution entwined with fascination, morality shadowed by attraction. The night stretched into tense silence, punctuated only by the subtle rhythms of the room, the tick of a clock, the distant hum of traffic, the quiet breathing of two people whose lives were now irrevocably intertwined. The protagonist understood, with a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that his life had been transformed. He was no longer simply a survivor. He was a participant in a game of power, loyalty, and a dark, dangerous love that neither of them could yet define but both were keenly aware existed. By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the blinds, painting the room in shades of gray, the protagonist had made an unspoken choice. He would follow, learn, adapt, and perhaps even embrace the dangerous connection with the Italian Mafia boss who had saved him, guided him, and now tested the very limits of his morality, courage, and heart. Outside, the city stirred to life, unaware of the battles fought in shadows, the alliances tested, and the bonds formed in secrecy. Inside, a new chapter had begun, a chapter of suspense, power, moral challenge, and the dark, unexpected love that would shape every decision, every risk, and every heartbeat to come. The city's streets were slick with rain from the previous night, neon lights reflecting in puddles like fractured glass. Inside the black car, the Italian Mafia boss sat behind the wheel, eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that seemed to map every shadow, every movement, every potential threat. The protagonist, seated beside him, felt a tight knot of anticipation mixed with an undeniable pull toward the man whose presence had already reshaped the contours of his life. The night promised danger, and the boss's calm authority made the weight of it all almost tangible. "You will come with me," the boss said without preamble, voice low, resonant. "Tonight, you will see why trust and loyalty are not abstract concepts, they are survival. We have a situation. An outside threat is challenging our control, testing our alliances, and threatening everything we built. You will observe, learn, and act if required." The car moved through the darkened avenues, weaving between traffic with an effortless grace, as though the city itself bowed to the presence of the man behind the wheel. The protagonist's heart pounded not only from the thrill of impending danger but from the magnetic tension that seemed to radiate from every line of the boss's body. Every glance, every subtle gesture, seemed charged with meaning. There was power, danger, and he realized a strange, intoxicating intimacy that left him breathless. They arrived at an abandoned warehouse near the docks, the air thick with mist and the smell of salt water and oil. Shadows moved within, indicating the presence of rival operatives, men whose intentions were veiled in secrecy but sharpened with threat. The boss exited the car first, every motion deliberate, commanding, radiating authority. The protagonist followed, adrenaline coursing through his veins, understanding that tonight would test his ability to remain calm, perceptive, and above all loyal. Inside the warehouse, tension hung like a living entity. The rival faction had gathered, unaware that they were about to witness the precision, influence, and calculated danger of the Mafia boss. Every movement of the boss was a lesson in control, every subtle word, a demonstration of authority. He negotiated, threatened, and displayed power without overt violence, yet the room shifted under his presence. Respect and fear mingled, a delicate balance that the protagonist absorbed with wide-eyed intensity. Then came the first test. One of the rival operatives made a sudden, risky move, misjudging the boss's patience. In an instant, the room's tension spiked, knives unsheathed, eyes widened, and time seemed to slow. The boss moved with inhuman precision, intercepting the threat, neutralizing it with a combination of strategy and force that left the rival frozen. The protagonist, heart racing, understood that this was more than a lesson in survival, it was a demonstration of how power, loyalty, and calculated action intersected in the Mafia world. As the situation de-escalated, the boss turned to him, eyes piercing. "Do you see?" he asked quietly. "This world is unforgiving. Mistakes are fatal. Hesitation is death. And yet, loyalty, trust, and action define not only survival but influence. Learn this well." The protagonist nodded, adrenaline mingling with awe and an undeniable fascination. He felt the pull of something deeper, a dangerous, intoxicating connection to the man who had saved him, guided him, and now taught him the deadly art of survival in a world ruled by fear, respect, and power. Hours passed, and the threat was neutralized, the rival faction retreating with a mixture of caution and begrudging respect. Outside, the first hints of dawn crept across the skyline, illuminating the city in a pale, gray light. The boss and the protagonist returned to the car, the silence between them heavy, charged with unspoken emotions. "You did well tonight," the boss said finally, voice low. "You observed, you adapted, and you survived. That is not enough for survival, it is the beginning of understanding power, influence, and loyalty. And perhaps, understanding yourself." His gaze lingered, sharp and intimate, a mixture of command and something more, something personal, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The protagonist, still shaking from the night's events, felt the weight of the words, their resonance mingling with the tension that had been building since the rain-soaked alley. He understood, with chilling clarity, that his life had irrevocably changed. He was no longer merely surviving, he was entangled in a web of power, danger, and dark, unexpected love that both exhilarated and terrified him. As they drove back through the city, the rain beginning again, faintly tapping against the windshield, the protagonist felt a strange combination of fear, respect, and attraction. He realized that every choice from this point forward would be influenced by the presence of the Mafia boss, by the danger surrounding them, and by the dark, magnetic pull that bound them together. Survival was no longer simply about staying alive, it was about understanding power, navigating morality, and confronting the unexpected, irresistible force of love in a world ruled by danger. By the time the car returned to the safety of the garage, the protagonist knew one thing: life in the Mafia world was a relentless test of loyalty, courage, and morality. But more than that, it was a world where unexpected connections could shift everything, where trust, desire, and dark love intertwined in ways that neither chance nor choice could fully predict. Left for dead in the rain, he had survived. Now, immersed in the perilous, intoxicating life of the Italian Mafia boss, he was learning to thrive and to feel in ways he had never known possible. The city awoke under a gray, misty dawn, the streets glistening from an early drizzle that left everything damp and reflective. The protagonist had spent the night replaying the events at the docks, the precision, the authority, the calculated danger of the Italian Mafia boss, and the thrill that had threaded fear with an unexpected fascination he could not yet name. Yet even as adrenaline ebbed, unease began to creep in. In the world they now inhabited, danger wasn't only external, it often came from those closest to you, shadows disguised as allies. The boss summoned him to a private office in one of their Mafia-controlled buildings, a sleek space that overlooked the city like a predator surveying its domain. His expression was calm, almost casual, yet the air around him vibrated with unspoken power. "There's a complication," he said quietly, sliding a folder across the polished table. "Someone inside our organization is undermining us. Loyalty is fractured, and the consequences will be swift if not addressed." The protagonist felt a chill. Betrayal within a Mafia hierarchy was more dangerous than any rival's attack. It was invisible, insidious, and deadly. Who could it be?" he asked, trying to steady his voice. The boss's gaze was sharp, unrelenting. "That is what you will help me uncover. Pay attention, observe, question. Trust will be tested, and morality challenged. Some choices will be easy to make, others will weigh on you." He paused, eyes softening briefly, a subtle hint of personal concern threading through the commanding presence. "And remember, sometimes unexpected loyalty can come from the most unlikely places, just as unexpected bonds can form where you least anticipate." The day unfolded like a dangerous game of chess. The protagonist followed the boss through a series of meetings, interrogations, and silent observations. Every gesture, every exchanged word, every hesitated glance carried significance. A subtle slip in loyalty here, a concealed glance there, small indicators that could reveal the hidden traitor. The tension was palpable, the stakes immeasurable. And all the while, the protagonist felt the underlying current of the Mafia boss's presence, a magnetic force that drew him closer, mixed fear with fascination, and planted the first seeds of a dangerous, irresistible attachment. Late that evening, in a secluded office upstairs, the boss confronted the suspect, a trusted lieutenant whose betrayal had been suspected but not yet proven. The confrontation was quiet, tense, and laden with threat. Words were weapons, silence was a strategy. The lieutenant faltered under the boss's gaze, realizing the absolute authority he faced. The protagonist watched, heart pounding, as the scene unfolded, a masterclass in power, fear, and influence. The resolution was swift, calculated, and decisive, leaving the protagonist both awed and unsettled by the moral clarity and ruthlessness required to survive in this world. As the confrontation ended, the boss turned to him, eyes locking in a moment charged with intensity. "Do you understand why this had to be done?" he asked quietly. The protagonist nodded, though the moral weight of the actions lingered heavily. "Yes. I understand. But it's difficult to watch, even knowing it's necessary." A faint smile touched the boss's lips, brief and enigmatic. "The world we inhabit does not allow hesitation. Choices must be made, sometimes at great personal cost. And yet, amidst the darkness, there can be moments of connection, of understanding, of something unexpected." He stepped closer, so that the space between them was charged with tension, fear, respect, and the first undeniable spark of attraction. The protagonist felt his pulse quicken. The proximity of the man, the intensity of his gaze, the subtle warmth radiating from his presence, it was magnetic, dangerous, impossible to ignore. And in that moment, he realized that survival was not merely about physical endurance or loyalty. It was about navigating the emotional complexities of a man whose world was built on power, respect, and ruthlessness, yet whose presence had begun to awaken something deep within him, something he had never felt before, something that could only be described as dark, unexpected love. Hours passed, and the city outside seemed oblivious to the battles, betrayals, and alliances forged in shadows. The protagonist stayed close to the boss, observing, learning, and slowly beginning to understand the delicate balance of power, trust, and desire that governed their world. He realized that danger was constant, morality fluid, and loyalty a currency that had to be earned with precision. And he understood that, for the first time in his life, he was willing to navigate that darkness, not just to survive, but to remain near the man whose presence had come to dominate his thoughts, his fears, and his fascination. By dawn, the moral tests of the night had left him exhausted, yet awake in ways he had never been before. He had witnessed betrayal punished, loyalty confirmed, and the subtle, dangerous intimacy of a connection that neither chance nor circumstance could ignore. Left for dead in the rain, he had been saved, guided, and now tested by the Italian Mafia boss whose world was as perilous as it was intoxicating. And as he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, he realized that nothing in his life would ever be the same. Outside, the city stirred to life, unaware of the intricate web of power, loyalty, and dark love being woven in its shadows. Inside, two lives had begun to intertwine in ways that would shape every decision, every risk, and every heartbeat to come, forever changed by the rain, by survival, and by the magnetic presence of a man who ruled both the streets and the uncharted territory of the protagonist's heart. Night had fallen over New York City, heavy clouds blotting out the moon, the streets glistening wet with a lingering drizzle that reflected neon lights in fractured patterns. The protagonist felt a familiar tension coil in his stomach as the Italian Mafia boss slid into the driver's seat of the sleek black car. Tonight's mission was different, far riskier than previous lessons, more physical, and more direct. This was a test of courage, instinct, and loyalty. Survival here depended not just on observation, but action. And the boss's gaze, calm and commanding, left no doubt, failure was not an option. "You've learned to watch," the boss said, voice low, carrying the weight of authority and something more, an undercurrent of personal challenge. "Tonight, you act. One wrong move, one hesitation, and everything changes. Do you understand?" The protagonist swallowed hard. Yes. I. I understand. The words felt inadequate, but he could not deny the rush of adrenaline, the tight pull of fear and anticipation. More than that, he could not deny the subtle heat of the boss's presence beside him, the magnetic force that had begun to infiltrate his thoughts, twisting caution and desire together in an inescapable knot. They arrived at a derelict warehouse on the edge of the city, its rusted steel and broken windows silhouetted against the faint glow of streetlights. Inside, a rival faction had gathered, their intentions sharp and clear. Weapons were subtly drawn, movements tense, and the air hummed with the unspoken understanding that violence could erupt at any second. The boss moved with unmatched precision, his presence alone commanding respect, instilling fear and asserting control. The protagonist followed, heartbeat pounding, each step a lesson in focus, calculation, and survival. The rival faction attempted to assert dominance, misjudging the boss's patience. In response, the Italian Mafia boss acted swiftly, neutralizing the threat with a combination of strategy, physical precision, and sheer authority. The protagonist, though initially frozen with fear, realized he was being tested, his instincts, his courage, and his ability to act under pressure. The moment arrived. One of the rival operatives lunged toward the boss, and instinct took over. The protagonist moved, guided by a combination of adrenaline and the subtle training he had absorbed. He intercepted the attack, diverting danger, protecting the man who had saved him. It was a defining moment, proof of loyalty, bravery, and his emergence as someone who could survive and contribute in this ruthless world. The boss's gaze met his as the threat was neutralized. There was no immediate smile, no praise beyond a subtle nod, but the intensity of his eyes conveyed everything: respect, acknowledgement, and a barely contained sense of personal interest. The protagonist felt a rush, pride mixed with exhilaration, fear mixed with fascination, and the undeniable pull of an emerging, dark love that both thrilled and terrified him. After the confrontation, they retreated to the safety of the car. The night air was damp and cold, but the car's interior held a tense intimacy. The boss's voice was calm yet edged with something deeper. "You acted well," he said. "Tonight, you proved more than loyalty. You proved courage. You proved the instinct to survive and to protect. That is rare." The protagonist felt a shiver of both fear and something more personal. I just did what I had to," he admitted, though he could not hide the slight tremor in his voice. The boss's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a fleeting glimpse of humanity beneath the calculated authority. "Sometimes, the most important lessons are learned in moments like these," he said. "And sometimes, the connections forged in danger are the ones that last, shape decisions, and alter the course of your life." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning, charged with emotion neither fully acknowledged yet both felt acutely. By the time they returned to the garage, the city had quieted, bathed in the muted glow of streetlights and the residual mist of rain. The protagonist's body was exhausted, but his mind was alive with the intensity of the night, the danger, the moral choices, the thrill of survival, and the ever-growing awareness of the Mafia boss's presence as both protector and irresistible force. As he prepared to leave, the boss reached out, briefly resting a hand on his shoulder. The touch was fleeting, controlled, yet it sent a jolt of heat and electricity through him, a reminder that the darkness of this world was intertwined with something unexpected, something dangerous, and something intensely magnetic. The protagonist understood, with a clarity that left him breathless, that he was no longer merely a survivor. He was entwined in a web of power, peril, and dark, undeniable attraction that would define every choice and every heartbeat to come. Outside, the city continued unaware, indifferent to the lives shaped in shadows, the alliances tested, and the dangerous bonds formed. Inside the garage, two lives had grown closer in ways that defied logic, morality, and expectation, entangled by survival, loyalty, and a dark love that neither could ignore. Left for dead in the rain, the protagonist had survived. Now, in the storm-laden streets of New York and the magnetic presence of the Italian Mafia boss, he was learning not only to live but to feel in ways he had never imagined possible. The city streets were silent, cloaked in fog and shadows, as if the night itself held its breath. Inside the garage, the protagonist moved cautiously, senses sharpened by the events of the past weeks. Survival in this world was never guaranteed, loyalty and power were constantly tested. And tonight, the lesson would be harsher, more personal. The Italian Mafia boss entered without warning, his presence filling the room with a quiet intensity that left no space for doubt. "There's been a betrayal," he said, voice low, measured, dangerous. "Someone within our inner circle has compromised our operations. We'll need to act carefully, but swiftly. The wrong move, and lives including yours could be lost." The protagonist's stomach tightened. Betrayal from within was far more perilous than any external threat. It was invisible, corrosive, and capable of unraveling everything built on loyalty and respect. "Who?" he asked, voice trembling slightly despite his attempt at calm. The boss's eyes darkened. "I don't know yet. That is what you will help me uncover. Pay attention, trust your instincts, and prepare for difficult choices. And remember, sometimes danger comes not from the outside, but from those you call allies." They moved through the city, following subtle clues, questioning contacts, and observing behavior that could reveal the traitor. Every interaction was a test of perception and judgment. Every gesture, every word, every hesitation could mean life or death. The protagonist felt the pressure mounting, but he also sensed an undercurrent of trust, a rare acknowledgement from the Mafia boss that he was more than just a bystander. He was a participant in the delicate balance of power, fear, and influence. Hours into the investigation, the betrayal revealed itself in a startling confrontation. A lieutenant, someone the protagonist had come to respect, had secretly colluded with the rival faction, endangering lives and operations. The boss confronted him with calculated precision, words sharp yet veiled with authority, displaying power without unnecessary violence. The lieutenant faltered, realizing the immensity of the mistake, the magnitude of the authority facing him. The protagonist watched, heart pounding, as the boss executed a masterclass in handling betrayal, swift, ruthless, and yet meticulous, ensuring control without descending into chaos. Every movement, every decision was a lesson in leadership, power, and morality. He felt both fear and awe, understanding that this world demanded not only survival but a mastery of human nature and the courage to act decisively. Once the situation was contained, the boss turned to him, eyes intense and piercing. "Do you see why loyalty matters? Do you understand the consequences of betrayal?" The protagonist nodded, though the weight of the lesson pressed heavily on him. "Yes. I do. But it's hard to watch, even knowing it's necessary." The boss stepped closer, the faintest trace of vulnerability in his gaze. "It is never easy," he admitted quietly. "But sometimes, the choices we make, the people we trust, and the bonds we form define not only survival but the course of our hearts." The proximity, the intensity, the unspoken meaning between them sent a shiver down the protagonist's spine. Fear mingled with desire, loyalty intertwined with fascination, and the pull of dark, unexpected love became undeniable. Hours later, back in the privacy of the garage, the tension softened but remained charged. The rain began again outside, gentle at first, then relentless, tapping against the roof in rhythm with the protagonist's racing heart. The boss's presence, calm yet magnetic, drew him closer, an unspoken invitation wrapped in authority and danger. "You've done well," the boss murmured, voice low, intimate, carrying weight beyond praise. "You acted with courage, discernment, and loyalty. And you survived the night, the betrayal, and yourself." The protagonist's breath caught, the words mingling with the sound of rain and the intensity of the moment. He understood that this was more than acknowledgement, it was recognition, connection, and something far deeper, dangerous, and intoxicating. For the first time, the protagonist allowed himself a fleeting sense of surrender, feeling the magnetic pull of the Mafia boss, the tension between fear and desire, power and intimacy. In that quiet moment, with rain pouring outside and shadows filling the garage, he realized that survival alone was no longer enough. He wanted something more: connection, understanding, and perhaps even the dark, unexpected love that had been growing silently but relentlessly between them. The night ended without words, but with an unspoken agreement, a fragile acknowledgement of trust, danger, and the subtle, magnetic pull of something neither of them could yet name. Outside, New York City carried on, oblivious to the webs woven in shadows, the bonds tested in peril, and the hearts quietly entwined in the presence of danger, power, and undeniable attraction. Left for dead in the rain, the protagonist had survived. Now, having navigated betrayal, moral choice, and the perilous presence of the Italian Mafia boss, he was beginning to understand that survival, loyalty, and dark love were inextricably bound in ways that would define every moment to come. The city streets were slick and shimmering under the glow of neon signs, rain falling in a relentless drizzle that turned every shadow into a potential threat. The protagonist gripped the edge of the car seat, pulse racing, senses on high alert. The Italian Mafia boss drove with his usual calm precision, eyes scanning the darkened streets as though he could see every hidden danger before it manifested. Tonight was different. Tonight, danger was no longer theoretical. A rival faction had coordinated an ambush, a calculated strike aimed at destabilizing the boss's operations and sending a message that New York's underworld was not to be trifled with. The protagonist felt the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. Survival would depend on speed, instincts, and an unwavering trust in the man beside him whose presence had become magnetic, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. Without warning, a convoy of black SUVs emerged from the shadows, cutting them off. Guns glinted under the streetlights, and shouts pierced the night. The boss's hands moved with practiced precision on the wheel, maneuvering the car with a fluid grace that made every second count. The protagonist felt a surge of adrenaline and fear, yet beneath it, something deeper: a desire to stay close, to survive, to prove himself in this world of peril and power. Shots rang out, echoing against the rain-soaked buildings. The protagonist ducked instinctively, heart pounding as bullets splintered the windshield. The boss's voice was calm, commanding, resonating with authority that seemed to bend the chaos around them. "Stay low. Trust me, and do exactly as I say." Every word was both instruction and reassurance, a tether anchoring him amidst the storm of violence. The car swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding an SUV attempting to ram them. The protagonist's hands gripped the seat, knuckles white, but he followed instructions with precision, instinct guiding him under the boss's silent mentorship. There was no time for hesitation, no room for fear beyond the edge of survival. Each movement was a test, each heartbeat a lesson in trust, courage, and action under pressure. Eventually, the chaos subsided, the rival faction retreating under the boss's precise and terrifying command. The streets were silent once more, punctuated only by the patter of rain and the protagonist's ragged breathing. The boss parked in a secluded alley, turning to him with eyes dark and intense, yet softened by a rare glimmer of concern. "You survived," he said quietly, voice low but heavy with meaning. "Not everyone does in situations like that. You moved well, trusted instinct, and trusted me. That matters." The protagonist felt warmth and electricity surge through him at the words, a mixture of relief, pride, and the undeniable pull of something far more dangerous: desire. The tension between them lingered, unspoken yet palpable. The boss reached out, brushing a damp lock of hair from the protagonist's forehead. The touch was brief, controlled, but it ignited a spark that neither could ignore. The protagonist's breath caught, pulse hammering in a rhythm that mirrored the storm outside. Fear, attraction, respect, and loyalty swirled together, a heady mix of emotion and adrenaline that made the moment almost unbearable in its intensity. "I could have lost you," the boss murmured, close enough that his breath stirred the protagonist's ear. And he stopped, the words unfinished, charged with meaning, the unspoken weight of danger and desire hanging between them. The protagonist swallowed hard, heart pounding. I trust you, he managed to say, the simplicity of the words belying the storm of emotion within. It was more than trust, it was acknowledgement of the bond forged in peril, the dangerous attraction that neither could ignore, and the realization that life in this world was inseparable from connection, loyalty, and unexpected love. The night stretched on, the rain relentless outside, yet inside the secluded alley, time seemed suspended. Words were unnecessary, the unspoken tension, the shared experiences of danger, and the closeness of their bodies communicated everything that neither dared to say aloud. The protagonist understood, with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified him, that survival in this world was not merely about action or loyalty, it was about navigating the dangerous, magnetic pull of connection with a man whose presence had begun to dominate his thoughts, fears, and desires. By the time they returned to the garage, the city beyond was quiet, unaware of the ambush, the violence, and the intimacy forged in shadows. The protagonist's body was exhausted, but his mind and heart were alive with awareness of the dangerous, intoxicating bond that had deepened during the night. He realized that this connection, the dark love, the shared fear and trust, would shape every choice, every heartbeat, and every risk from this moment forward. Left for dead in the rain, he had survived. Betrayal had tested him. Life-threatening danger had proven him. And now, under the storm-laden skies of New York, he understood that power, loyalty, and dark, unexpected love were inseparable forces that would define the course of his life, and the magnetic, commanding presence of the Italian Mafia boss who had saved him, guided him, and awakened something deep within him. The early morning light was dim, filtered through a thick layer of fog that blanketed the city. Inside the Mafia headquarters, tension hung like a living entity, invisible yet suffocating. Rumors of shifting loyalties and internal power struggles had reached the Italian Mafia boss's ears, and the protagonist could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down. Survival was no longer just about physical danger, it was about moral choice, perception, and understanding the fragile web of alliances that kept the organization intact. You need to understand something, the boss said quietly, standing close enough that the protagonist felt the warmth radiating from him. In this world, power isn't just a weapon, it's a responsibility. Decisions aren't black or white. Every choice carries consequences, and sometimes those consequences are measured in blood. His voice was steady, controlled, but there was an intensity beneath the calm that made the words impossible to ignore. The protagonist nodded, swallowing hard. He had learned much about fear, loyalty, and survival, yet nothing had prepared him for the weight of this moment. Internal struggles were more dangerous than any rival gang, more insidious than any ambush. Here, morality was tested in ways that could shape not only one's survival but one's very soul. Hours passed as the boss navigated meetings, interrogations, and tense discussions with trusted lieutenants. The protagonist observed, noting subtle gestures, withheld glances, and the silent communication that passed between men who understood the stakes. Every word was calculated, every pause carried meaning. And then came the moral dilemma, the decision that would test the protagonist in ways he had never imagined. A young member of the organization, previously thought loyal, had been implicated in a scheme that threatened to unravel several key operations. The evidence was ambiguous, the consequences severe, and the choice clear yet agonizing: punish the young man to maintain order and authority, or extend mercy, risking future chaos. The boss turned to the protagonist, eyes intense, reading his reaction. "What would you do?" the boss asked, voice low, carrying both challenge and trust. The protagonist hesitated, heart racing. Loyalty, morality, and instinct collided within him. Punishment seemed necessary to maintain control, yet compassion, the faint remnants of his humanity, urged caution. Finally, he spoke, voice steady despite the storm inside, "I would, give him a chance. A warning. But he must understand the consequences. Loyalty is earned, and betrayal cannot be repeated. The boss studied him for a long moment, then allowed a rare, approving nod. Wisdom and courage often walk hand in hand with mercy, he said softly. Remember that. It is not weakness to temper authority with understanding. It is strength, and it is rare in our world. The tension shifted subtly, replaced by a charged intimacy that neither could ignore. The protagonist felt the pull of the boss's gaze, the warmth of proximity, the silent acknowledgement of a bond forged in danger, trust, and the complexities of human emotion. He realized that amid the moral calculus, the adrenaline, and the power struggles, a dangerous, unexpected love had taken root, a force as intense as it was unspoken, magnetic, and unavoidable. Later, as the city slept under the veil of fog and rain, the boss drew the protagonist aside into a private office. Words were unnecessary at first, the silence spoke volumes. Their closeness, the shared experiences of fear and trust, and the unspoken attraction hung between them, palpable and undeniable. The boss reached out, brushing a hand against the protagonist's cheek, gentle, deliberate, intimate. The touch was fleeting, yet it left a mark deeper than any words could convey. You've changed, the boss murmured, voice low and resonant. You've learned to survive, to trust, and to understand the weight of decisions. And, you've survived the darkness around me, even as it draws you closer. That is rare, more than most will ever know. The protagonist felt a shiver run through him, a mixture of awe, fear, and desire. I trust you, he whispered, the simplicity of the words carrying the depth of everything that had transpired between them: danger, loyalty, and the burgeoning dark love that had become impossible to deny. The boss's eyes softened, the intensity giving way to a fleeting warmth. And I trust you, he admitted, a confession rare in its vulnerability. But understand this: our world is unforgiving. Love, desire, these are luxuries few can afford. And yet, here we are. The tension between them crackled, a mixture of unspoken understanding, attraction, and the dangerous intimacy born from shared peril and trust. Outside, the city remained indifferent, rain softly pattering against windows, oblivious to the delicate, charged moment unfolding in the shadows. Inside, two lives had intertwined, tested by betrayal, danger, and moral choice, forging a bond that was both perilous and irresistible. Left for dead in the rain, the protagonist had survived. Betrayal, ambush, and moral trials had tempered him. And now, in the presence of the Italian Mafia boss, he understood that survival, loyalty, and dark, unexpected love were irrevocably intertwined, shaping the path of every heartbeat, every decision, and every risk to come. The rain had returned with relentless intensity, hammering against the streets and rooftops of New York City, blurring lights into streaks of gold, red, and blue. The protagonist felt the familiar coil of tension in his chest, each heartbeat sinking with the storm outside. Tonight would decide everything: the culmination of loyalty, power, and the dangerous, magnetic bond that had grown between him and the Italian Mafia boss. The final thread had emerged unexpectedly: a coalition of rival factions, emboldened by prior chaos and betrayal, aiming to dismantle the boss's empire once and for all. The protagonist followed closely, adrenaline coursing through him, yet beneath it, a more personal tension, the pull of the man whose presence had dominated his life, who had saved him, taught him, and awakened something dark, forbidden, and irresistible within him. They arrived at the confrontation site, an abandoned pier, the rain slick wood groaning under the weight of tension and the storm. Shadows moved among crates and containers, figures armed and ready. The air was thick with danger, every second pregnant with potential violence. The boss's calm authority radiated like a shield. The protagonist felt both fear and a strange exhilaration as he took in every detail, every movement, every subtle clue. The ambush began with sudden, violent precision. Rival guns cracked through the rain, bullets splintering wood and metal, echoing across the pier. The protagonist moved instinctively, applying lessons learned through countless nights of danger, following the boss's silent cues. Together, they fought with a combination of strategy, lethal precision, and unspoken coordination born from shared danger and trust. Amid the chaos, the protagonist was separated momentarily, facing a rival who lunged with deadly intent. Adrenaline and instinct took over. He dodged, countered, and disarmed, remembering every lesson the boss had imparted: the balance of fear, power, and control. The fight was brutal, immediate, and terrifying, yet he survived, proving not only loyalty but courage and capability in the unforgiving world he now inhabited. When the final rival fell or fled into the stormy night, the protagonist collapsed against a crate, soaked, exhausted, and trembling. The boss appeared beside him, calm yet intense, a hand gripping his shoulder with firm reassurance. "You survived," he said, voice low and resonant, carrying both authority and rare personal acknowledgement. "You acted with courage, loyalty, and precision. Tonight, you proved your place in this world and beside me." The storm raged around them, yet inside the fragile safety of the pier, a moment of intimacy unfolded. The boss's gaze lingered, eyes dark, commanding, yet softened by a rare vulnerability. "You understand now," he murmured, leaning closer, the rain mingling with the heat radiating between them. "Loyalty, survival, and something far rarer: connection, trust, and love, even in the darkness." The protagonist's breath caught, pulse racing, overwhelmed by exhaustion, adrenaline, and the undeniable pull of the man before him. I do," he whispered, voice trembling, carrying the weight of everything they had endured together: fear, betrayal, danger, and the magnetic tension of a love neither had expected. The boss stepped closer, close enough that the rain-soaked air mingled between them, every movement deliberate, every gesture charged with emotion and desire restrained by control. "This world," he said quietly, "is unforgiving. But it also reveals what is worth holding onto. You survived, you fought, you chose, and in the storm, you found something unexpected. Something worth protecting." In that moment, amidst the raging storm, the protagonist felt the full intensity of their bond: danger and desire, power and vulnerability, survival and love intertwined in a way that defied logic yet felt inevitable. The storm outside mirrored the tumult inside him, a perfect reflection of the life he had been thrust into, and the man who had become central to it. Hours later, back in the safety of the Mafia headquarters, the city muted under the lingering rain, the protagonist and the boss allowed a rare moment of quiet. Words were minimal, the silence was heavy with meaning. The hand on a shoulder, the fleeting glance, the shared acknowledgement of survival, loyalty, and dark, unexpected love: these conveyed what words could not. The storm outside finally eased, leaving a city washed clean yet bearing the marks of struggle, survival, and transformation. The protagonist understood, with a clarity born from danger and experience, that life had irrevocably changed. He had been left for dead in the rain, saved by a man whose power, presence, and unexpected capacity for connection had altered the course of his existence. He had faced betrayal, ambush, moral choices, and life-threatening peril, and emerged stronger, wiser, and bound by a dark, magnetic love that neither could deny. As the first hints of dawn broke across the skyline, the protagonist and the Italian Mafia boss stood together, two figures shaped by danger, morality, and desire. Survival had been the first lesson, loyalty the second, and love, unexpected, dark, and undeniable, the final revelation. The world around them remained unforgiving, but in each other's presence, they had found a rare sanctuary: a bond forged in the rain, tempered by peril, and destined to endure, whatever storms might come. The city awoke, oblivious to the webs of power, trust, and dark love that had been tested and solidified in its shadows. And for the protagonist, the rain-soaked night had become a memory, a turning point, and a beginning: the start of a life intertwined with danger, power, and the irresistible, magnetic presence of the man who had saved him, and captured his heart.